And the fact is that over the past 2 decades, there's been a series of crises in finance, in health, in energy, and geopolitics that have laid bare collectively the risks of extreme global integration. And more recently, great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons, tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. And the multilateral institutions on which countries have relied, the WTO, the UN, the COP, that architecture of collective problem solving are all under threat. As a result of this, many countries are concluding that they must develop greater strategic autonomy. And that impulse is understandable. When the rules no longer protect you, you must protect yourself. A country that cannot feed itself, fuel itself, or defend itself has few options.
On a global stage in Mumbai, Mark Carney didn't shout, he didn't name names, and he didn't need to. He described a world where tariffs are weaponized, where trade becomes leverage, and where access to markets carries a price. Psychologically, this resonates because leaders and investors feel the anxiety of volatility in every deal, every negotiation. Carney framed Canada not as a nation buffeted by global chaos, but as one building structural power, calmly diagnosing the ruptures of extreme global integration. Critics might call this cautious, but this is strategy disguised as calm, the kind that positions Canada ahead of the storm. The real warning is clear. Dependence is vulnerability, and Canada is refusing to be vulnerable.
You know, you're speaking about volatility in the world, and you talked about the new world order. Despite the U.S. Supreme Court ruling, President Trump is now talking about a 15% tariff. 10% is in place at this point in time. An executive order for 15 hasn't come. Are you prepared, or should we be prepared for a world where a baseline tariff is just going to have to be the way to do business with the U.S.? That is going to have to be the price to access the U.S. market. Is that now a realization and an acknowledgement?
Well, President Trump has been clear for months that being part of access to the U.S. market, you should pay, quote unquote, for access to the U.S. market. Sometimes that's in tariffs, sometimes that's in changing regulation, sometimes that's in investment commitments into the United States. We've seen all of those. I think this will likely settle down into tariffs, but the ability of the U.S. administration to do that over the longer term will be more likely determined by more conventional methods in trade agreements or not, than what are temporary measures. Even so-called 232 measures are temporary in the sense that they're addressing a specific perceived dislocation. And obviously the Section 122 ones that are used now have a time limit of 150 days.
Carney's solution wasn't outrage. It was autonomy when the rules no longer protect you. He argued, you must protect yourself. Psychologically, this lands because it speaks to the instinctive need for control when the system fails. Critics will argue that diversification is slow, that partnerships take time, but that fails to see the bigger picture. Structural resilience outlasts short-term retaliation. He framed sovereignty not as rhetoric, but as a strategy, showing that Canada's future depends on building 10 markets instead of paying for one, rejecting the coercion of tariff dependency politics, and asserting that strategic economy comes from autonomy, not appeasement.
As a result of this, many countries are concluding that they must develop greater strategic autonomy. And that impulse is understandable. When the rules no longer protect you, you must protect yourself. A country that cannot feed itself, fuel itself, or defend itself has few options.
Then Carney pivoted from diagnosis to strength. Tax cuts, defense expansion, a $500 billion industrial strategy, massive investment incentives. These aren't gestures. They are counterpunches. Psychologically, leaders respond to action more than words, and Carney made it clear. Canada does not fear tariffs. It competes structurally by lowering effective investment tax rates below the U.S., cutting red tape, and streamlining approvals. Canada is neutralizing leverage before it becomes a weapon. This is a kind of strategic clarity that separates nations reacting to shock from nations shaping the rules themselves.
We put in place what we call a super deduction, a broad-based 100% tax write-off for everything from manufacturing assets to intelligence infrastructure, R&D, clean energy, and EVs. And on top of this, we have instituted investment tax credits for across the clean electricity chain, from critical minerals through to storage. These measures reduce our marginal effective tax rate for investment to just 13%. Let me translate that in relative terms. That's 4.5 percentage points below the US level, and it is one half the G7 average. We are slashing red tape. Admittedly, the red tape for which Canada unfortunately had become infamous. We're slashing that red tape. All major projects will be approved within 2 years in cooperation with the provinces.
He detailed measures that redefine competitiveness. A 100% super deduction for everything from manufacturing assets to clean energy, plus investment tax credits along the entire clean electricity chain. The result? Canada's marginal effective tax rate for investment drops to just 13%, far below the US and half the G7 average. Calmly and analytically, Carney framed this as more than economics. It's structural empowerment. Psychologically, it reassures domestic and foreign investors alike that Canada is serious about long-term leverage. Critics may call it aggressive policy, but in reality, it's a surgical dismantling of barriers that have historically made Canada reactive rather than proactive.
What concerns you about what we're seeing today the most in light of the many developments that have taken place even since you made that speech in Davos?
I think I'm more optimistic, but where the
Than you were
concern-
in Davos?
Well, I'm more optimistic because of the reaction to that speech, and there's a sort of public reaction, but then the quality of the discussions with a wide range of countries who are all thinking the same thing, who all realize that there's many areas to partner together, and to be frank, who all want a positive agenda. They want to build, they want to move forward, they're confident. I mean, this to me, it describes India, it also describes Canada. And as opposed to being in a defensive world where you're waiting for the next tweet, and you're worried about your core economic relationships. No, build a relationship you can rely on for the long term. That lowers my worry level because there's just so much to do. And as an example, the scale of what's being discussed between Canada and India is a perfect illustration.
When asked about Trump's 15% tariffs, Carney didn't flinch. Yes, the U.S. wants payment for access. Yes, tariffs might settle in, but he pivoted to resilience. Build relationships you can rely on long term. Stop waiting for the next tweet. That line alone crystallizes the contrast between two leadership styles. One reacts to volatility, the other neutralizes it. Psychologically, it lands because it frames fear as temporary and autonomy as permanent. The forward-looking insight is stark. In a world where short-term coercion is normalized, Canada is choosing the path of strategic endurance.